Hey everybody, it's Jackie. How's it going? If you're new to me and this is the first time you're seeing my face, hello, what's up? My name's Jackie. I sit on my floor and I talk about books. So I hope that's why you're here, because that's what's going to be happening today. If you're not new to me, thank you for always tuning in and continued support. I really do appreciate it. I am so excited to be bringing you this review today. As you can see from the day's title of the video, I have a book review for you, and this is all on Dean Sykon's. I hope I'm pronouncing your last name right, dude. I apologize if I'm not. Finding Home, Hungary, 1945. It looks like this. I received this book through Reads Discovery. As many of you know, if you've been following me at all, I am a video reviewer for Reads Discovery, and this selection just, I cannot wait to talk about this. This is a World War II historical fiction focusing on Holocaust survivors reacclimating themselves back into the world after suffering the atrocities of Auschwitz. So if this sounds interesting to you and you want to know what my views are on it, because by the way, historical fiction is literally one of my favorite genres to read of all time, grab yourself a drink, have yourself a seat, and let's get talking some books. Okay, so like I said, this is Finding Home, Hungary, 1945 by Dean Sykon, and I received it through Reads Discovery. I am one of their video reviewers. And a few stats about this book when we get into it. This is World War II historical fiction. I would also consider this Holocaust survival fiction as well. We do have a lot of triggers in this, mostly for graphic depictions of genocidal violence. We also have some triggers for PTSD trauma. If you are a victim of the Holocaust, if you are a child of a victim of the Holocaust, or you have a survivor of the Holocaust in your family, this book could be quite triggering, because the depictions of genocidal violence and the anti-Semitic statements and the anti-Semitic violence that are used within its pages to convey the story and the emotion behind it are pretty graphic, and they're pretty telling, and they're pretty powerful. So please be warned that this one is a very emotionally triggering book for real occurrences. Historically, real things happen and survivors of it are still around today. This only happened in 1945. It's not ancient history. It's still our current history today. So why did I choose this book? I'm a history major. If many of you have followed me, you know this, but if you were new to me, you do not know this, but my degree is in history with a double minor in philosophy and gender and women's studies. And I have always been fascinated about the darker times in history, the unspoken stories of history. My main area is usually women's history, but I would believe the survivors of the Holocaust reacclimating themselves back into the world afterwards is definitely an unspoken voice, an unheard voice, and not a very popular voice to hear. That's why you don't find a lot of literature about it. You find a lot of primary accounts, but not a lot of historical fiction around it, because the subject material is so hard to process. This actually happened, and I believe these stories need to be told. And when I found out that this was about the survivors and how they came about bringing themselves back into the world after suffering the atrocity they did in Auschwitz, which is the main concentration camp that we're focusing on in this book, I was immediately drawn to that idea. Immediate. And then I found out that there's this heavy musical component into it, and I love a good historical fiction thrown over the musical component. Music conveys so many emotions. It can convey so many things, and the way it's used in this book is fucking perfection. It is phenomenal. So I was super ecstatic when I saw this, and I immediately grabbed it up as soon as I saw it. So a brief summary about this book so you kind of know what we're going into. This is the summary that I was provided to by Reads Discovery. I have not edited this at all. This is exactly what I was given, so you know what kind of really intrigued me. For 9 months in Auschwitz, 18-year-old Ava Fleiss clung to sanity by playing piano on imaginary keyboards. After liberation, Ava and 5 remaining Jews of Laszlo, Hungary, journey home seeking to restart their lives. Yet the town that deported them is not ready to embrace their return. Their former neighbors and friends resist relinquishing their newfound status and property, while Ava and the others search for a home that may no longer exist and deal with the traumas of war and loss. Their neighbors struggle with their roles as perpetrators, enablers, and bystanders during the Holocaust. Longing for the connection to her old life, Ava agrees to clean her former home, now the mayor's home, and to return for practice time on her piano. As her profound experiences allow her to access music at a depth she didn't know existed, Ava's performances begin to affect those around her with unexpected consequences. I read that and I about died, okay? I about died. I just thought that was fantastic, and I had to read this. This synopsis drew me in right off the bat. It gives you just enough to know that you are going to be talking about a very emotional story, a very powerful story, and you're also going to have some theoretical, almost ethereal kind of style experiences in this book with this musical component. And I just fucking thought that was fire, and I was so happy to pick this up. So let's get into what worked. The opening scene. The opening scene is Ava and a group of other individuals on a train cart, not going to Auschwitz, but coming home. It's described in so much detail that it is captivating, it's scary, it's moving, and it is, lack of a better word, it makes time stop. When I read that opening scene, time did not exist. It was not in existence for me anymore. It just stopped, and I was in that moment. I was in that cart with these people, and I was scared out of my mind. I was scared, and I fucking loved it. This opening scene pulled me right in, and it told me right off the bat this was going to be a hard read. This was going to be an emotional journey. I was going to get angry. I was going to get pissed off. I was going to get upset. I was going to be hopeful. I was going to be ecstatic. I would laugh. I would cry. I would do everything. In that one scene, I got all of that. And I knew walking the story that if everything was written with this intensity and this detail and this emotional pull, this was going to be something really special. So I have to point out that this opening scene was a fucking hook beyond hooks. It was fantastic. I absolutely adored it because it gave me what I needed to really just sink my teeth into. I didn't have to wait to get to know the characters. I didn't really have to learn their backstories because in the first couple of paragraphs, I was hooked because of this intensity, and he put me right in that train cart, right there. And it was fantastic. It was moving, and it definitely told me a lot about the upcoming story that I was about to read. Another thing that worked really, really well in this book was how our author handled the atrocities the Jewish people experienced in the concentration camps. You cannot tell this story about individuals reacclimating themselves to their homes without talking about the atrocities that they went through, okay? Now, if you went to school, you learned about the Holocaust. If you went to an American school, you definitely learned about the Holocaust, okay? And you might have seen some of the graphic depicted images that textbooks use. You might have seen pictures of survival of victims of the Holocaust and their survival pictures, and just the lack of humanity they look that they have anymore. They're just skin and bones. I have seen a lot of this, okay? And I've been to the National Holocaust Museum in Washington, D.C., and I have seen the exhibits, and I have read the history books on it. But to have the experiences described in as much detail as this man did was very difficult. And I knew it was going to be difficult because that opening passage, but he handled it with such tact and such grace that I felt okay. I felt okay to process the emotions that I was experiencing reading about this. I didn't feel like I was intruding. I didn't feel like I needed to close the book and shut my eyes to this, that I didn't need to see this. He handled it in a way that welcomed you to this experience, knowing that you cannot actually know what this feels like. But opening this world and explaining what these people went through and what they survived. The way he handled it was brilliant. He also was so honest about it. He didn't shy away from the brutality, from the disgust, from the demoralization that these people went through. He did not shy away from it. He put it blatantly in your fucking face. But you were safe because they're words on a page. But he drew you in, so you still felt some emotion. It wasn't just words on a page. It was this perfect balance of safety and fear at the same time, and other complex emotions that we experience when we read about stuff that really fucking happened to people. And we see how brutal humanity really can be for people. He handled this so well. So if you are triggered by Holocaust survivalist literature, if you are a victim of the Holocaust yourself, or a survivor of it, or a child of a survivor, I feel like you're in good hands, because he handled that dark material so well. He conveyed it enough to confirm that this happened. This is real. This is not bullshit. This is not being made up. But you're safe because it's over. But remember that it's not for some. And he conveyed it so well. I applaud you so much for this, because these are difficult topics to write about. They're difficult topics to digest, to absorb, to write about, and you were flawless with it. Flawless. And I just, it was amazing the way these were handled. I was so happy that our author did not shy away from the carnage and the brutality. He gave it to us, but still was able to handle it to us in a form that we can process and know that we're going to be okay. I thought it was fantastic. I loved the way the story was developed. So we meet our cast of characters on the train cart, and they are coming back to Laszlo. And you start to see where people stand on the Jewish people coming back into this town. Only 5. We have like a cast of 5 characters, I believe. 3 main ones. There's 2 that are you kind of come back and forth with, but 5 out of a couple hundred that were deported from this town. And the way that the story is developed from this point is a series of flashbacks, but it's not a clear flashback. It is, as you're walking with Ava, she sees something and it triggers her, and immediately she's in this other scene in Auschwitz, and you immediately feel like you've missed something. But as you read, you understand what's going on. He didn't have to do a page break or a line break. It was a seamless transition into this flashback, and then a seamless transition back. And because of these seamless transitions, you got the message that this memory was trying to convey, and how she was going to be handling this upcoming moment, or why she processed the previous moment the way she did. Ava goes through a gambit of emotions. All of our characters do, but we do primarily focus on Ava in this story. This is primarily her story. These flashbacks into Auschwitz, back into present time, back to pre-war, because they also seamlessly transition back then too. It seriously cements and builds this world that our author is creating in this. A world that we already know exists. So there's not a lot of really fictional elements he can really create around it. This world really did exist, and these emotions and these feelings are real. But the way he developed them was so smooth and so just, it was poetic. And I freaking adored it. Once I figured out that that's what it was, the first transition was a little kind of what's going on. But when I got through that whole scene, I realized what the author was doing. This is how he's building our world. He's building the past of the war. He's building the concentration camp, the Auschwitz, the atrocity world, and he's building our present day world all at the same time with these seamless transitions without having to say, I remember back then when I was in the camp. He doesn't have to use these transitional phrases. It's just a seamless moment. So it feels so much more authentic, especially for these triggering moments where you see Ava snap, or you see Oscar kind of lose it because he's gone through one of those moments where he's back in that mindset, and it comes back and he's back in modern day times, but his mind has not traveled back. It is so smooth and it's so well done. It was so well done. I freaking adored it. It was great. It was a great use of flashbacks. Flashbacks in historical fiction are a common mechanic to use, and this was used flawlessly. Flawlessly. I thoroughly enjoyed the gambit of character struggles that we experience. We're not only experiencing our main character struggles of anger, of towards the people that were forcing them out into these train carts and shunning them and calling them names and poking them with sticks and forcing them to move faster and laughing at them as families are completely just upheaved and left. We also experience the acceptance of that this happened to me and I need to process it. I need to move on. I need to hold on to that hope that humanity is inherently good, but there are bad apples. But I'm past the bad. I need to hold on that there are good people out there. We also see the game emotion of playing a game. We see all of these encompassed with people. And when I mean playing the game, realizing that if I want to get to where I need to go, I need to play their game. I need to be this token once more. I need to be this thing, this entity one more time, this chess piece one more time until I have enough power on my board to say bye and get what I want. We see this through all of our characters, but not only do we see these developments of emotions, we also see them on the other side. We see the people that were deporting them. You see the guilt, the shame, the possessiveness of their newfound property that they took after these people left. You're seeing all of these emotions flip-flop back and forth. But it's very, very clear when someone is transitioning, when they're starting to grow from that previous held belief, or versus when they're regressing back because they're fearful and this is what they know and that's how they're going to handle everything. I thought his character struggles and just everything in general was, and how he had our opposite characters, our non-Jewish characters handling their emotions, and our Jewish characters handling their reacclimation emotions. The juggle that our author is doing at this time is fantastic. He's juggling so many emotions, but it's very clear when you're talking about a specific character, we know at that moment what they're feeling, where they are in the scope of their spectrum of emotion. Are they still in possessive stage? Are they still in the moment where I need to understand that this was her home. I need to give it back. It doesn't belong to me. I enjoy it, but it's not actually mine. This letting go of things and possessions for the chance at something greater to hold and possess, a more of a community type thing more than just materialistic. He just handled it so exquisitely, and I thought it was fantastic. I never once wondered what my characters were thinking. I never once was concerned that they weren't growing or they weren't changing. Yes, we have characters that stay angry the entire time, but you see why they're angry and you see what humanity they actually belong to. And you understand, okay, so you're always going to be like this because you're a prejudicial fuck, versus you're somebody that went with the flow because you were scared and now you're sorry and now you're trying to make amends, versus somebody who, I have gotten used to this lifestyle, but I realize later on after things have happened and I start seeing the person that I hurt, what they're going through and the pain they're going through, I start to empathize and I realize I'm in the wrong. You see the growth of these characters, you see the expansion of these characters, you see it all. It's very clear as day. It's not something you have to intuitively understand. It's given to you and it's seamless and it's just exquisitely done. He did a fantastic job with it. Fantastic. This goes back to kind of the how he handled the atrocities of what Jewish people experienced in the concentration camps, the way he handles the anti-Semitic views in this book. There's no way to talk about the story without using them, because during when people were coming back, there were still people who believed this propaganda about the Jewish people that had convinced them to jump on this bandwagon and push them out, get rid of them, per se. And you still see this view throughout the entire story. It doesn't go away. Sometimes it gets more violent, sometimes it does decrease, but it still holds true for some of these characters. And the way he handled it was really, really well done. Is it brutal to read? Yes. Is it going to piss you off? Abso-fucking-lutely. It should. It should piss you off. Is it there for shock value? No. It is there to further develop this plot and to further develop this world that our characters are trying to find their way back through. That is why I wanted to point this out, is because it is not a shock value moment. These are not shock value moments when these statements are said, these horrendous, vile statements are said. They are not shock value. Are they shocking? Yes. Are they atrocious? Yes. But they further develop the world that our characters are in. He used them just enough to convey the world our characters are in. He does not overuse them. He does not underuse them. He used them for what he needed, and then he let them go. And as the reader processed them how we needed to. There are moments in this story where there were characters who said things that I'm like, you can just go fuck off and die. Mayor's wife being one of them. In the beginning, she could have went and get fucked. The things that she said, what? I was shocked. I stopped reading. I was like, what? But then as I saw her progression as a character, that was necessary. Those were necessary things for her to say. There was a necessary viewpoint for me to understand where she was to where she is now. Some of our policemen, it was necessary for them to say some of the things that they did and think the things that they did to convey where they were in the story and how they progressed and changed or became worse or became better. It was necessary for some of our characters to say the things, it wasn't my fault. I did what I was told. This victimization that they were trying to play. They weren't acknowledging the atrocities that these people went through. They were only acknowledging the victimization that they had no other recourse. It was important for them to say that because these people existed. And you need to see that to see their growth. I loved that he was not afraid to say these things. Are they vile? Yes. Are they completely uncouth and unnecessary in everyday world and everyday jargon? Yes. But for this story, they furthered the plot line and they further developed the world and they further developed our character, our main characters, and how they associated with certain individuals and how they continued to develop these relationships and replace themselves in a world that they were ripped from. Completely and totally perfect usage of it, even though they are vile and the events that go along with them are atrocious. The emotions that are conveyed when these statements are said are necessary for you as a reader as well, for you to be unnerved. This book is not designed to read easy, okay? It is supposed to be uncomfortable. It is. And the author makes you feel uncomfortable because you need to feel that uncomfortableness to understand where our story ends. This hope element that still, despite all of the atrocities that they suffered, through all of the prejudice, through all of the hate speech and hate propaganda that was spewed about this grouping of people, the hope that traced through it throughout the entirety. You need to feel that uncomfortableness to really appreciate that hope at that end and to really appreciate our ending of this story. I thought the way he handled it was very, very, very well done, very tactful, very, very well handled. I felt what I needed to feel, but I didn't overly feel uncomfortable where I need to put the book down where I'm like, no, he's just doing this for shock value. It was never a shock value thing. It was necessary for the conveying of the story to be told correctly and to convey what needed to be conveyed. I thought it was fantastic. Another thing that worked really, really well in this book is the musical component. So there is a piece that our main character of Ava is working on. She's a pianist. And music kept her basically sane through her atrocities. And she would play on invisible keyboards. And when she comes back, she's waiting for her professor. She learns that he did not survive. And in her pursuit to try to find some semblance of him to hold on to, some piece of his history to hold on to, she comes across a piece of work that was designed for her. And this piece of work is a direct symbolism of what our characters are going through. There's 3 parts to it. And it directly symbolizes the entire progression of their character arcs. All of our characters, whether they're good or bad. It also really, to me, symbolizes what we're still going through from this atrocity. And atrocities like this, not just the Holocaust, but anything similar to it, where a mass grouping of people is persecuted for just being who they are. And I thought it was great. I thought it was beautiful. I love a good musical component in stories because it's something that music can convey so many emotions in a very tiny little package. It's just a couple sheet of paper with some notes written on it. But when you put those notes together, they sink into you as a person and they pull everything, unearth everything. Nothing is safe from these music notes. They look like just these little music notes on paper. They're innocent little notes, but when they are turned into, you hear their tones and they're put together, they become little fucking shovels, okay? And they go in through your ears and they dig every orifice of you. Your mind, your heart, your soul, your gut, your emotions, everything that makes up a person, it will start to dig under and pull all of these feelings out. And I loved how this music in the story was doing this. When emotions became difficult to really talk about, there are moments in this story where you almost can tell that it was difficult for the author to write these parts. So you get these musical descriptions, and that's how he handles carrying these heavy burden emotions and these heavy trauma through, because we can just float along this musical path that he's laid out for us, and at the same time still feel everything we're supposed to feel and know that we're still okay because the music is carrying us. And when it lets us go, we're going to be okay. And the piece that she plays, that was written for her, this piece, it conveys that so well. It opens up you. It's describing as opening up the listener. And then you have the second piece where it starts to confront things, good and bad. And then you have the third portion where it becomes elevated and lifted. You have a problem. The problem is put in front of you. You are now confronting it. And now you are overcoming it. It is a complete symbolism for the story, for every single one of our characters. And I thought it was exquisitely done. I had such a good time with it. And I really wish there was a soundtrack that went with this book. Like, there should be a soundtrack. If you ever make this into an audiobook, this music needs to be playing in the background during these scenes, because I think it will convey so much more to this book that I don't even know is actually there, because I didn't listen to this music while I was reading this book. But if you ever record this in an audiobook, please, for the love of God, include renditions of some of these pieces that you mention in the story, because I feel it will further expose a layer of this story that only the music can expose, that you can't see from the words on the page. You have to hear it. And I think that it would be fan-fucking-tastic. Legitimately. It'd be amazing. When they were describing the music, and not just the piece that she's writing or that she's working on, there's a lot of musical description of like dissonance between notes and how chords progress together and how they work together. A lot of musical theory is involved in this book. And I did take some music theory in college, but it didn't work out to my favor. So I got some of that, but I really enjoyed having that in there because I did understand that a lot. I understand the dissonance between some of these chords and how they symbolize the dissonance between personalities. And again, a lot of the symbolism with this music, it was just phenomenally well done. It was spectacular. I can't speak highly enough of the musical component in this book. I can't, because the musical component almost transcends this book and gives it another layer that I don't even know because I didn't hear it, and I want to. There is a minor sense of justice in this book, and I really enjoy that we got to see that. For all the pain that we experienced in this book and heartache and prejudice, it was very nice to see a little bit of justice. Not a lot. And in comparison of what the Jewish people went through, it is nothing. It's a drop in the pail. But for our characters, it was a little bit of we made it through and you're now going to pay for it. So there was a little bit of sense of justice, and I was very happy that we got that little bit of sense of justice because a lot of victims of the Holocaust never got it. So it was nice to see some of them get it. And I really, really appreciated that a lot. I thought that was, it wasn't a really highly developed element, but it was just enough to kind of satiate that want for justice that this book creates. It gives you just enough. You still want justice for these people, and you still want them to pay for their comeuppance, but the little bit that we do get, it's excellent. It invokes more hope in the story that eventually more justice will occur if people speak up, and I thought it was great. It's historical fiction. This thing was with research with an inch of its life. For the research that I did on it, and the Holocaust is a rabbit hole of history. So if you research it at all, I mean, it starts to go down a rabbit hole. I'm not even kidding you. But the historical accuracies I was able to find, they were on point. I did read the author's note that he did interview a lot of survivalists and their own memoirs. And so I don't exactly know which elements are fiction and which ones are not, but I feel like there's a lot more history in this book than there is fiction. I do genuinely feel that in this book because of just how accurate the emotions we're feeling with some of these historical events. I feel like there's a lot more history in this than there is fiction, and I really, really appreciate that because history books are boring to read sometimes, and this was not a boring read. I very much enjoyed it. So even though I feel like there's a lot more history than there's fiction in this, I really enjoyed the way it was displayed and it was used. I felt that it was conveyed really, really well and handled really, really well, along with the musical theory. Like I said, it's definitely interspersed in this book, and you can tell he did his research on musical theory to make sure that that part was accurate. You know, the chords going together and how they actually would sound together in the tonals, and how it's kind of like offsetting or off-putting. Certain chords together progressions are very off-putting versus ones that are very pleasant to hear. You can definitely tell he did his research in this, and I very much appreciate that. As a history person and wanting the truth to be told of history, I very much appreciate it. What went into this book and the work that went into this book, for sure. Now, that is everything that worked, and there is thousands more things that worked in this book. But there, however, was one thing that I found that I thought didn't work as well as I wished it had. And so we're going to talk about it. So in this book, there is a lot of Yiddish words, and for most of them, we get a translation. I don't speak Yiddish. I don't know what half these words meant. But for most of them, we do get somehow contextual evidence, contextual clues of what this word is, or it blatantly said what it is. However, there were some prayers that were in the book, and this is what I don't know. I don't know if it's okay to translate them because they are prayers. So I don't actually know if he was even allowed to do this, because I got translations for a lot of things, but the prayers I didn't get translations for. And I would really have loved to know what they were saying in those religious moments. Because our characters, we do have the gambit of characters of very religious for a Hasidic Jewish person to our main character, Ava, who didn't really care about her religion. She was like, I'm not really that practicing. We did like, Jewish light, kind of like, I pick and choose what I really wanted to follow kind of thing. So we have the gamut of religious practice in this book. But it would have been really nice to know what those prayers had said, but I don't know if they could actually be translated, or because I don't know Jewish law about when it comes to their prayers, if they are allowed to be translated. I don't know that. So, but I would have really liked to know what the prayers said, because definitely when it came to the very final scene and the final played musical piece, it was a prayer. And it would really like to know what the words were. I think it would have just given that extra punch to that scene and that finality of that moment right there. I think that would have been great. But that was the only thing. That was the only thing that I found that didn't work. That was the only thing that kind of stuck with me, that didn't work. Everything else, I thought this book was exquisite. And it was just, it was beautiful. It was a beautiful piece of work, and I am so happy that I read it. Now, there is a minor romance. I mean, we're talking like minor, okay? So for a spice rating, it has a puff. And it's not even really like a puff because we have one kiss, but it is sweet and it is pure and it is perfect. And it was a moment of lightness that was needed in this book. So I was appreciative that it was put in there. I definitely enjoyed that moment a lot. I really, really enjoyed that sweet, little bit of sweetness to this story, because there is a lot of dark and a lot of heavy in this. To have this light moment just casually put in there, because our lead character, Ava, is a young girl. She has desires. She's beautiful. She is noticed, and she notices people. And it's nice to know that even despite all of everything that she experienced, she's still a girl. She's still a normal girl who survived one of the most intense things on the face of the planet that's ever happened in our history. But she's still a girl at heart, and she still wants to pursue her life and her relationships with people, not just her career and her goals, but wants to pursue matters of the heart. And it's really nice to see that little layer of humanity with her. I thought it gave her more of a humanistic trait. We get to see her run a gamut of emotions of humanity. We get to see her angry, we see her pissed off, we see her hurt, we see her frustrated, we see her numb, we see all of these things. But it was nice to see that one extra side to kind of complete that picture of her. So I thought that was a very nice moment to throw in there. But this is not a spicy read. This is an emotionally draining read, not a spicy read. So you get a little puff, just a little puff. Which leads me to my final thoughts. This story is moving, it's provoking, and it's very, very unnerving. This is not an easy read, and I'm not talking about its use of words, its use of the Yiddish language. There's no language barrier, there's no grammatical error, things like that. I'm not talking about that when I talk about difficult to read. What I'm talking about, the difficulty of reading, is that this book is not designed to make you feel comfortable. It's written to make you understand this dark period in our history and to remind you that it's still going on, that it's still there, that these thoughts are still there, and there are people here who survive this. And that's really unnerving and really fucking uncomfortable. Okay? It is. It's uncomfortable to not be able to empathize with characters. Because you're so fucking happy you weren't born during this time period and you weren't born Jewish. It's uncomfortable to acknowledge that you are happy that you are not this person. And this book makes you feel that way. It makes you feel very grateful for the life that you have and the life that you were born into, that you weren't born into this, that you never had to experience this kind of hate. At least it did for me. But I love books that aren't afraid to make me feel uncomfortable. I love authors that aren't afraid to put shit right in my face and say, you need to acknowledge this. It's real. It happened. You can't sweep it under the rug. You can't pretend it didn't fucking happen. You need to feel this. Because you as a human, this is where humanity becomes a whole concept. We're all interconnected. And you as a human, it's your right to understand people. And kind of an obligation sometimes too. Feel it, absorb it, and learn from it. Because if you don't understand, if you don't learn about it, if you don't feel your way through it, it can happen again. And I love a book that will throw that right back in your face and remind you of it. That's not afraid to make me as a reader feel uncomfortable. That's a gutsy author, that's a ballsy author, and I appreciate authors like that. Because there need to be more of them. There needs to be more of them. If you love World War II historical fiction, if you love Holocaust literature, if you seek things like that out, I believe this book is right up your alley. I think it will give you another layer of this period in our history. And I think you will really, really enjoy it. But understand that it is difficult to read at times due to the hate speech that's used. It is very difficult. Like I said, it's unnerving. If you love classical music, if you love Chopin, Liszt, Bach, Beethoven, if you love classical composers, I think you will appreciate this story too because of the musical component and how heavily laced through it is. It is not the main component of the story, but it is a major player in this story. It's almost a character in and of itself. And I feel like someone who enjoys classical music or who plays classical music or is a pianist themselves or a classical musician would appreciate the respect and the gravity that our author gave this musical character and its importance. I feel like they would see another side of this book that I missed because I am not a classically trained pianist. I took like 5 years of piano lessons and then I stopped. I do know the history of some of these composers, but I know their histories, not all of their pieces. But I feel like someone who knows their pieces and knows their backgrounds to them would appreciate the story immensely. This book for me was 5 stars. Without a shadow of a doubt. This thing was 5 stars. This thing was moving. It was fantastic. It made me feel things I haven't felt in a long time. When I was in high school in 2005, I went to the National Holocaust Museum. And the only things I remember from that museum were the pile of shoes, the wall of photos, and my ticket, which had a name of a real person that actually went to Auschwitz. And at the end of the museum, I find out if I survived. As a senior in high school, I didn't really understand the gravity of that museum. Did some of the displays really show to me? Yes, and those are the ones that stick to my mind. The shoes in particular display was quite hard, but I remember going through the museum and feeling just in shock and kind of numb after a while. And then when I got into my undergrad and I started researching history the way that I do now, more analytically, not just more regurgitating information, but really starting to read the unspoken stories and learning the underbelly of these major events that I knew backwards and forwards and inside out, all these different things, but I didn't really know the humanist side of these events. When I started learning that humanist side, I remember learning a little bit about the Holocaust and reading some literature about it and seeing films about it that make me feel pissed off and unnerved and annoyed and just in awe. That's how can an entire nation believe this crap and actually allow this atrocity to happen. This book made me feel what I feel on the museum and made me feel again what I did when I started researching the humanist side of the Holocaust, the little bit that I did in college. Made me feel all over again, and then added on this layer of emotion that I didn't know I had. I sat and talked to my husband while I was reading this book and told him about moment and read him some excerpts of what some of the people in the town were saying to the Jewish people that came back and some of their thoughts and some of the bigoted statements that they were saying. And I was just appalled and shocked because this is the first piece of literature I've ever read about the aftermath of the Holocaust. I've read a lot about the experience in the Holocaust, like the experiences of the camps, but not a lot of the survivors and what happened after. And that prejudice was still propagated and carried on, and this other layer of hell that they had to go through after the physical layer of hell they just experienced. And this book made me feel very, very humble that I never had to experience that. And like I said earlier, I love books that will put that in my face and remind me that this shit happened. You need to talk about it. You need to feel your way through it and learn from it, because it will happen again if you don't. I believe that this is definitely a perfect representation of historical fiction. It is fictional enough to convey those emotions that draw us in as readers, that make us cry out and scream out and get angry. It's historical enough that you feel safe knowing that the history is real, that you can research it and you're not going to be led astray. And that middle zone where they combine, where they meet, where the fact and the emotion combine, that reality is done perfect in this. This is a perfect version of historical fiction. It's historical enough to be real history. It's fictional enough to give me the emotion of a fictional story and that pull that a fictional story can give me, and make it all an experience. This is an experience. The Holocaust Museum was an experience for me. The defining moment of learning about the humanist side of major events in history was an experience for me. This was an experience for me. And the very last moment of this book took my breath away. And it sealed this experience for me, and it will be something that I remember forever. So, a note to my author. Thank you for writing this story. I read in your author's note that you were afraid to write this story, that it was very hard at times to write this story. Thank you for never giving up on it. This is a story that needs to be told. These emotions and these feelings need to be conveyed. People need to know about stuff like this. I'm a firm believer in you don't know where you're going unless you know where you've been. We have to know where these people have been to understand where they're going and why they do what they do. We have to know as a people where our history has been so it can never be repeated. History doesn't need to be washed away and whitewashed. It needs to be shoved in your face and reminded all the brutality, all the carnage, all the hope, all the romance, all of it. It has to be spoken about. So thank you for telling these stories of these unspoken people. Thank you for telling the unspoken story, the real story. Thank you for not giving up on it. I don't know if you came across Dr. Robert Cunith's work. He was my professor in college, and he teaches a whole class on the Holocaust. That was where his PhD was art during the Holocaust time period. I have handed this book off to him because I feel like it's something that he can use if he has not already read it. I just wanted to let you know that as well. So, but thank you for your story, and thank you for your bravery and your guts. This was beautiful. and I am so happy that I got to read it. So thank you. That's my review of Finding Home, Hungary, 1945 by Dean Sycon. Sycon? I hope I said your name right. I'm sorry if I didn't. I'm really bad with names. Thank you guys, and I will see you guys all soon with another video.